The shotgun blast that tore through the mountain pass sent Preston Tucker's horse into a panic, and in the chaos of gunfire and screaming animals, he never saw the cliff edge until gravity claimed him. Katherine Greene heard the commotion from half a mile away, where she'd been collecting wild herbs near her family's isolated homestead in the rugged terrain outside Park City, Utah. And something in the desperate sounds pulled her toward danger instead of away from it. The year was 1878, and these mountains had seen plenty of violence between miners, claim jumpers, and desperate men seeking fortune in the silver veins that ran through the Wasatch Range. Katherine's father had taught her to recognize trouble by its particular thunder, but this felt different somehow, more scattered and confused than the calculated attacks that sometimes plagued the mining roads. She gathered her skirts and ran toward the sounds, her medicine bag bouncing against her hip, 18 years of mountain living giving her feet confidence on the treacherous terrain. When she found him at the base of a rocky outcrop, she thought he was dead. Preston lay twisted among the stones, his horse nowhere to be seen, blood soaking through his shirt from wounds she couldn't yet count. His face was pale beneath several days of trail dust and beard growth, and only the faintest rise and fall of his chest told her she hadn't arrived too late. The sound of retreating horses echoed from somewhere above, but Katherine didn't waste time looking for the men who'd caused this. She had maybe minutes to decide if this stranger lived or died. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for the worst injuries first. A bullet had grazed his ribs, deep enough to bleed but not fatal if she could stop the flow. His left arm was broken, bent at an angle that made her stomach turn, and a gash across his forehead bled with the dramatic flare that head wounds always did. But it was the internal injuries she worried about most. A fall like that could have torn something vital inside, could have broken ribs into lungs or spine into paralysis. "Can you hear me?" she asked, knowing he probably couldn't but needing to try. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "I'm going to get you home. Try to stay still." Her home was closer than town, closer than any other help, and she couldn't leave him here while she fetched assistance. The decision made itself. Katherine had hauled deer carcasses through these mountains with her father, had dragged injured sheep back to their barn, had strength in her arms that city girls never developed. This man was bigger than a deer, heavier than any sheep, but she'd make it work because the alternative was unthinkable. She fashioned a travois from pine branches and her shawl, working quickly as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the peaks. Getting him onto it required leverage and determination, and several whispered apologies for the pain she must be causing. He groaned when she moved his broken arm, a sound that was both horrible and hopeful because it meant he could still feel, still fight. The journey back took an hour that felt like 6, her shoulders screaming and her hands blistered, but she didn't stop except to check that he still breathed. Her mother met her at the edge of their property, eyes widening at the bloody cargo Katherine dragged. "Lord above, what have you brought us?" "He needs help, Mama. He'll die if we don't try." Sarah Greene had been a midwife and healer in these mountains for 20 years, had pulled more people back from death's door than the town doctor ever had, and she didn't waste time arguing. Together they got Preston into the small room off the kitchen that they used for the sickest patients, the ones who needed constant watching. They cut away his shirt and found more bruises than skin, a tapestry of impact painted purple and black across his ribs and back. "Fetch water, lots of it," Sarah instructed. "And bring me the elderflower tincture and yarrow. This boy's got more holes than a moth-eaten blanket." They worked through the night. Katherine boiled water and tore clean cloth into bandages, while her mother cleaned and stitched the bullet wound with tiny, precise stitches that would leave the smallest possible scar. They set his arm, a process that required Katherine to hold him down while he thrashed and screamed without waking, and splinted it with boards wrapped tight. The head wound they cleaned carefully, checking his pupils in the lamplight for signs of brain damage. "He might not wake up," Sarah said quietly as dawn broke through the window. "A fall like that could be he's broken inside in ways we can't fix." "He'll wake up," Katherine said with more confidence than she felt. She'd been sponging his face with cool water, watching the way his eyelids moved beneath the lids like he was dreaming. "He's fighting." Her father, Daniel Greene, returned from his prospecting claim that morning to find a stranger in his house, and his daughter red-eyed with exhaustion beside the sick. He listened to the story with the patient quiet that characterized him, then nodded once. "You did right. We'll see it through." Preston's fever started on the second day, turning his skin hot enough to hurt when Katherine touched him. They packed him in cool, wet cloths and spooned willow bark tea between his lips, fighting the infection that wanted to claim him. He muttered in his delirium, fragments of sentences that painted pictures of a cattle drive gone wrong, of men he called brothers, of a place called Amarillo that he needed to reach. Katherine sat with him through the worst of it, changing his bandages and whispering reassurances he couldn't hear. "You're safe now," she told his unconscious form. "Whatever happened up on that mountain, you're safe here." On the fourth day, his eyes opened. Katherine had been dozing in the chair beside his bed, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle when she heard him try to speak. The sound brought her fully awake, leaning forward to catch his words. "Water," he managed, the single syllable rough as gravel. She held a cup to his cracked lips, supporting his head with her other hand. He drank greedily, then coughed and winced at what that did to his injured ribs. His eyes, she noticed, were the color of storm clouds, gray with hints of blue, and they moved around the unfamiliar room with understandable confusion. "Where am I?" His voice was stronger now, shaped by an accent she couldn't quite place. "Texas, maybe, or somewhere farther south." "Our home, about 6 miles from Park City. I'm Katherine Greene. I found you at the bottom of a cliff 4 days ago." His hand moved to his bandaged ribs, then to his splinted arm, cataloging damage. "My horse." "I didn't see it. I'm sorry." Preston closed his eyes and she saw him working through memory, piecing together what had happened. "Ambush. 3 men, maybe 4. They wanted the payroll I was carrying." He looked at her sharply. "Did you find saddlebags? Just you. Whatever you were carrying, someone else has it now." The frustration that crossed his face was profound, but he seemed too exhausted to maintain it. "How bad?" "Broken arm, bullet wound, cracked ribs, concussion. My mother says you'll live if infection doesn't set in, but you'll be here a while." "I can't stay. I need to get to Amarillo, need to tell them what happened." Katherine crossed her arms. "You can barely lift your head. You're not going anywhere for at least a month, probably longer. You don't understand. Those men, the ones I was riding with, they're depending on that money. Without it, they lose everything. And without proper healing, you'll lose your life. Which would you prefer?" The logic was inescapable, and she watched him wrestle with it before exhaustion won and his eyes drifted closed again. She let him sleep, noting the improved color in his face, the way his breathing came easier now. Her mother had been right to push the infection hard with every remedy they knew. He turned a corner over the following days. Preston grew stronger by increments. Katherine helped him sit up to eat broth, then stew, then the solid food that signaled real recovery. Her mother checked his wounds daily, pleased with how cleanly they healed, and her father nodded approval when Preston managed to stand with help after the first week. The stranger was proving to be a fighter, stubborn about his recovery in ways that sometimes frustrated Katherine and sometimes made her smile. "You need to rest," she scolded when she found him trying to do exercises with his good arm. "You'll tear something. Lying in bed makes a man weak." "I've already lost too much time." "You lost your life and got it back. Consider that a fair trade for a few weeks of patience." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks under that gray-eyed scrutiny. She was used to being invisible to men, too tall and too serious and too interested in healing arts to attract much attention from the cowboys and miners who passed through Park City. But Preston looked at her like she was worth studying, worth understanding. "Why did you help me?" he asked. "You didn't know me, could have left me there. Could have, didn't want to." She busied herself straightening his blankets, avoiding his gaze. "My mother taught me that life is precious, that we're obligated to preserve it when we can. Besides, leaving a man to die isn't exactly the neighborly thing to do. Still, you saved my life, Katherine Greene. I won't forget that." The way he said her name, with that slight Texas drawl wrapping around the syllables, did something strange to her pulse. She told herself it was just the tiredness, the long nights of nursing, the proximity required by caregiving. She absolutely was not developing feelings for this injured stranger who'd be gone as soon as he could ride. Preston healed faster than her mother predicted, driven by that urgency he carried like a physical burden. By the third week, he could walk around the small room without assistance. By the fourth, he was joining the family for meals at the kitchen table, learning their rhythms and becoming something more than a patient. He told them his story in pieces, painting a picture of his life between bites of Sarah's excellent cooking. He was 24, had been working cattle drives since he was 16, and had signed on with the Triple T Ranch outside Amarillo as their trail boss 2 years ago. The money he'd been carrying represented the entire operation's profit from selling their herd in Salt Lake City, meant to pay the ranch hands and keep the operation running another year. Without it, good men would lose their wages, the ranch would fold, and Preston would have failed in the one job he'd been trusted to complete. "We'll report it to the marshal," Daniel suggested. "Describe the men who ambushed you. Maybe they've been causing trouble elsewhere." "Wouldn't recognize them if I tried. It happened too fast, and I was too busy falling off a cliff." Preston's frustration was obvious. By now, they've spent that money or buried it or ridden so far there's no trail to follow. The ranch is finished either way. Katherine watched him struggle with the weight of that failure, saw how it ate at him despite her mother's reassurances that staying alive was what mattered. She wanted to comfort him, to ease that burden, but didn't know how. Instead, she brought him books from their small collection, sat with him in the afternoons when her chores were done, and talked about everything except what he'd lost. He asked about her life, and she found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone. About how she wanted to be a real doctor someday, not just a mountain healer, but knew that medical schools didn't accept women. About the beauty she found in these harsh mountains, the way sunrise painted the peaks in colors that had no names. About the loneliness of being different, of wanting more than what this isolated life offered but loving her family too much to leave. Preston listened like her words mattered, like she mattered, and the space between them began to fill with something neither acknowledged but both felt. Katherine noticed the way his face changed when she entered a room, the way his eyes tracked her movements. She caught herself braiding her hair with more care on mornings when she knew she'd be checking his bandages, choosing her better dresses instead of her work clothes. "You're getting attached," her mother observed one evening as they prepared supper. "That's dangerous, Katie girl. He'll be leaving soon." "I know that," Katherine chopped carrots with more force than necessary. "I'm not a fool, Mama. Never said you were. But the heart doesn't always listen to the head, and that young man looks at you like you hung the moon. He's grateful, that's all. I nursed him back to health. It's natural to feel gratitude." Sarah made a knowing sound but didn't push further. Katherine appreciated that, because she wasn't ready to examine what she felt too closely. It was safer to pretend this was temporary, that Preston Tucker was just passing through her life on his way to somewhere else. The day he decided to leave arrived with autumn's first real cold snap. 6 weeks had passed since the ambush, and Preston could move without pain, could use his formerly broken arm with only slight stiffness. There was no medical reason to keep him anymore, and they all knew it. Katherine found him in the barn, saddling one of her father's horses that Daniel had agreed to loan him. "So this is it," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "You're really going?" Preston's hand stilled on the saddle straps. "I have to. Need to face what happened, tell the men at the ranch, figure out what comes next." "I know. I just thought maybe you'd say goodbye first." He turned to face her fully, and the expression on his face wasn't what she expected. Not gratitude or simple farewell, but something deeper and more complicated. "That's the problem, Katherine. I don't want to say goodbye." Her heart did something acrobatic in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been lying to myself for weeks now, telling myself this was just gratitude or circumstance or some temporary thing that would pass once I left. But it's not passing. Every day I get stronger, I feel worse, because getting stronger means leaving you, and leaving you feels like the worst mistake I could make." Katherine couldn't breathe properly. "Preston, let me finish. I know I've got nothing to offer you. I failed at the one job that mattered, and I'll be lucky if the ranch keeps me on as a regular hand after this. I've got no money, no prospects, just a reputation that's about to be ruined. But these weeks with you, they've been the best of my life. The way you care for people, the way your mind works, how you see beauty in everything around you. Katherine, you're extraordinary, and I'm just a cowboy who fell off a cliff." "You didn't fall, you were shot at," she corrected automatically, then registered what he was actually saying. "You want to stay. I want you to come with me." The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back and they'd finally broken free. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other 6 weeks, but I'm asking anyway because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Come to Amarillo with me. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my days trying to deserve what you did for me." Katherine's mind spun. This was insane, reckless, everything her practical nature should reject. She barely knew him beyond what 6 weeks of proximity could teach. He was right that he had nothing material to offer. Going with him meant leaving her family, her mountains, everything familiar. But when she looked at him, standing there in her barn with his heart in his eyes, she didn't see any of those logical obstacles. She saw the man who'd thanked her for every meal she brought, who'd listened to her dreams like they mattered, who'd slowly become the first person she thought of when she woke, and the last before she slept. She saw possibility and adventure, and a kind of happiness she'd only read about in books. "That's not a proper proposal," she heard herself say. "You're supposed to be on your knee." Preston's face transformed with hope and something like joy. He dropped to his good knee immediately, taking her hand in both of his. "Katherine Greene, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You're brilliant and strong and beautiful, and I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes." The word felt like jumping off a cliff of her own, terrifying and exhilarating. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll go with you to Amarillo and anywhere else you need to go." He stood and pulled her into his arms, and Katherine had a moment to think this was really happening before his lips found hers. The kiss was gentle at first, careful of his still healing injuries, then deepened into something that made her forget about the cold barn and the horse standing nearby and everything, except the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. They broke apart breathless, and Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I promise I'll take care of you. I'll work whatever jobs I need to work. I'll build you a good life." "We'll build it together," Katherine corrected. "That's what marriage means." Telling her parents required courage. They bolstered in each other, walking back to the house hand in hand. Sarah took one look at their faces and sighed, but she was smiling. Daniel was harder to read, studying Preston with the intense focus he usually reserved for evaluating ore samples. "You're asking to take my daughter away," Daniel said finally. "That's not a small thing you're asking." "No, sir, it's not. And I know what it looks like, that I've got nothing to recommend me right now. But I love Katherine, and I'll spend my life proving I'm worthy of her." "Can you provide for her? Keep her safe?" "I'm a hard worker, and I'm good with cattle and horses. I'll find work in Amarillo or somewhere else if that doesn't pan out. As for safety, I'll protect her with my life. Already owe her mine." Daniel looked at Katherine. "This what you want, girl?" "Because if you're just caught up in the romance of nursing him back to health, you can say so. No shame in changing your mind." "It's what I want, Papa. I love him." The words settled into truth as she spoke them. She did love Preston Tucker, had probably been falling for him since that second week when he'd argued with her about resting, when she'd seen his stubbornness and determination, and the fundamental goodness underneath his frustration. This wasn't just proximity or gratitude or romance. This was real. "Then I suppose we need to plan a wedding," Sarah said practically. "Can't have you running off to Texas without proper vows. What will people think?" They were married 3 days later in Park City's small church, with half the town attending because news of Katherine Greene marrying the stranger she'd saved spread faster than wildfire. The ceremony was simple. Katherine in her mother's wedding dress altered to fit her taller frame, Preston in new clothes that Daniel had mysteriously produced and refused payment for. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Katherine felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. The journey to Amarillo took 3 weeks, following the trails south through Colorado and into the Texas Panhandle. Preston taught Katherine to read the landscape like a book, showing her how to find water and shelter, how to move safely through country that could kill the careless. She taught him the botanical names of plants they passed, showed him which were medicinal and which poisonous, and they talked about everything and nothing as the miles accumulated behind them. They camped under stars that seemed close enough to touch, and Preston held her close in their shared bedroll, mindful of her innocence and the vulnerability of traveling rough. "When we get to Amarillo, I'll find us a proper place," he promised. "Somewhere with walls and a real bed. You deserve better than sleeping on the ground." "I'm exactly where I want to be," Katherine assured him, and meant it absolutely. The Triple T Ranch was smaller than she'd imagined, a collection of weathered buildings sprawled across the flat grassland outside Amarillo. The owner, Thomas Thorne, was a grizzled man in his 60s who looked at Preston with a complicated mix of relief and disappointment when they rode up. "Figured you were dead," Thorne said bluntly. "Been 6 weeks without word. Told the men the money was gone and they should find other work." "I would have sent word if I could," Preston replied. "Got ambushed in the mountains, would have died if not for Katherine here. She's my wife now." Thorne's eyes moved to Katherine, assessing. "That's so. Well, congratulations are in order then, though I'm afraid I can't offer you your old job back, Tucker. Without that money, we're barely hanging on. Can't afford a trail boss anymore. Preston nodded, and Katherine could see the shame in the set of his shoulders. I understand. I failed you, and that's on me. But I was hoping maybe you could use another hand, at least temporarily. I'm good for the work. Can always use good hands, and you're one of the best. Pay won't be what you're used to, though. I'll take what you can offer. They were given a small cabin on the edge of the property, one room with a stone fireplace and gaps in the walls that would let in the winter wind. Katherine looked at the rough space and saw potential, saw home if they made it so. Preston looked ashamed, like he'd promised her more than this. It's perfect, she told him firmly. We'll make it work. And they did. Katherine spent her days making the cabin livable, stuffing the wall gaps with mud and grass, sewing curtains from cheap fabrics she bought in town, turning the bare space into something that felt like theirs. Word spread quickly that there was a healer on the ranch, someone with real knowledge beyond the rough first aid most cowboys knew, and soon she was treating injuries and illnesses for the other hands and their families. Preston worked dawn to dusk, proving himself all over again as just another ranch hand. Katherine saw how it wore on him, the loss of status and responsibility, but he never complained. He came home exhausted and still managed to smile when he saw her, to ask about her day, to hold her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Their wedding night finally happened in that rough cabin, and Katherine discovered that all the medical knowledge she possessed hadn't prepared her for the reality of being with Preston. He was patient and gentle, mindful of her inexperience, and when they came together it felt like the final piece of something falling into place. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, she felt complete in a way she'd never known she was incomplete. I love you, Preston whispered into her hair. Thank you for choosing this life with me. This life chose me right back, Katherine replied. We're where we're supposed to be. Winter came hard to the Texas panhandle, bringing winds that screamed across the flat land and cold that made their cabin's inadequacies obvious. Preston worked double shifts to earn extra money, coming home with his hands cracked and bleeding from the cold. Katherine heated water to soak them, applied salves she made from precious ingredients, and worried about him pushing too hard. You need to rest, she scolded. You're going to make yourself sick, need to provide for you, need to give you better than this. His gesture encompassed the cabin, the rough life they were living. You are providing for me. We have food and shelter and each other. That's more than a lot of people have. But Preston carried his failure like a weight, and Katherine didn't know how to ease it. The ambush had taken more than money. It had taken his confidence, his sense of who he was beyond being the man who'd lost everything he was trusted to protect. The change started on a February morning when one of the ranch's best horses went into a complicated labor. The regular horse doctor was in town dealing with an outbreak of some illness, and the animal was in real danger of dying along with her foal. Thomas Thorne stood in the barn looking helpless until Katherine arrived with her medicine bag. I've helped birth plenty of creatures, she told the owner. Let me try. What followed was 2 hours of careful work, Katherine's arms buried in the horse up to her elbows, repositioning the foal when she felt how it was stuck. The mare screamed and thrashed, and it took 3 men to hold her steady while Katherine worked. But when the foal finally slipped free, alive and breathing, and the mare survived the ordeal, Thomas Thorne looked at Katherine with new respect. That animal's worth more than most things on this ranch, he said gruffly. You just saved me from ruin. Just doing what needed doing, Katherine replied, washing her arms clean. Not just. That took skill and knowledge most people don't have. Preston told me you want to be a real doctor someday. Seems to me you already are. Word of what Katherine had done spread through the ranching community, and soon people were coming from miles around seeking her help. Animals mostly at first, because female doctors were strange enough, but animal doctoring was at least somewhat acceptable. But then the people came too, asking her to look at sick children and injuries that wouldn't heal and ailments the regular doctor couldn't solve. Katherine found herself accidentally building a practice, charging small fees that started adding up. She kept the money in a jar on their cabin's shelf, watching it grow and feeling something like pride. This was her contribution, her way of building their life together. Preston noticed, of course. "You're becoming famous," he teased one night as they ate dinner. "The miracle healer of Amarillo." Hardly a miracle, just paying attention to what people need and trying to help. "You're extraordinary, Katherine Tucker. Do you know that?" She felt her face heat with pleasure. "You might be biased, definitely biased, also definitely right." Spring brought a visitor to the Triple T ranch that changed everything. Marcus Perry rode in on an expensive horse, dressed too well to be a regular cowboy, and asked for Preston by name. Katherine watched from their cabin door as Preston approached the stranger, his body language wary. They talked for a long time, expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief to something that might have been hope. Finally, Preston turned and called Katherine over, his face transformed in ways she couldn't read yet. "Katherine, this is Marcus Perry. He's a range detective, been tracking the men who ambushed me." Perry tipped his hat to her. "Madam, your husband's been cleared of all wrongdoing and the men responsible have been caught. They had most of the money still on them, buried outside Provo. Idiots held onto it too long, trying to figure out how to spend it without drawing attention." Katherine's hand found Preston's, squeezing tight. "The money's recovered." "Most of it, yes, madam. Mr. Thorne will get his payment back, minus what we couldn't recover. Your husband's reputation is restored, and there's the matter of the reward." "Reward?" Preston's voice sounded strange. $500, posted by the Ranchers Association for information leading to the capture of the gang that's been hitting trail drives. You were their fourth victim. With your testimony about the ambush, we were able to identify and track them. That reward money is yours." Katherine felt Preston's hand tremble in hers. $500 was more than a year's wages for a ranch hand, more money than either of them had ever held at once. It was possibility made tangible, future made real. "I don't know what to say," Preston managed. "Say you'll accept it, because you earned it the hard way." Perry pulled an envelope from his coat and handed it over. "The association thanks you for your service. We all sleep better knowing those particular predators are in custody." After Perry left, Preston and Katherine stood outside their cabin holding the envelope between them like something fragile and precious. The implications were enormous, overwhelming in their potential. "We could go anywhere," Preston said slowly. "Do anything. You could go to medical school back east, places that are starting to accept women, or we could buy land, start our own ranch. Katherine, we have choices now." She thought about it, about what she truly wanted versus what she'd accepted as impossible. The dream of medical school felt both closer and somehow less urgent than it once had. She'd already built a practice here, already found a way to heal people that didn't require institutional approval. But there were other dreams, other possibilities. "What do you want?" she asked him. "Not what you think I want, but what makes your heart happy." Preston looked out at the flat Texas grassland, at the ranch buildings in the distance. "I want to build something that's ours. A place where you can practice your healing and I can work with horses and cattle. Somewhere we can put down roots, raise kids eventually. I'm tired of working someone else's dreams. I want to build our own. Then that's what we'll do." They found land an hour's ride from Amarillo, a beautiful stretch along the Prairie Dog Town fork of the Red River. It wasn't much, just 160 acres, but it had water and grass and potential. They used half the reward money to purchase it outright and put the rest into building a proper house, a barn, and buying starter stock. Thomas Thorne, grateful for the return of his money and impressed by Preston's vindication, sold them 10 good horses at below market price and threw in 3 pregnant cows. Other ranchers, hearing the story of the trail boss who'd survived an ambush and been proven innocent, offered work and advice and the kind of neighborly support that made hard country livable. Katherine and Preston built their ranch with their own hands over that spring and summer. They worked from sunrise to sunset, Preston handling the heavy construction while Katherine managed the animals and continued treating people who sought her help. They were exhausted every night, falling into bed too tired for anything but sleep. But they were building something real, something that belonged to them alone. By autumn, they had a 2-room house with real windows and a sound roof, a barn that would shelter their animals through winter, and a growing reputation. Preston ran a small but efficient horse training operation, gentling and selling animals to other ranches. Katherine's healing practice brought in steady income and gave her work that fed her soul. They were happy in ways that surprised them both, finding joy in the simple rhythm of their days. Preston would come in from the barn to find Katherine mixing medicines at their kitchen table, and he'd kiss the top of her head just to make her smile. Katherine would watch Preston work with a nervous horse, his patience and skill obvious, and feel pride swell in her chest. This was partnership, real and equal and good. Their first Christmas together, they hosted dinner for Katherine's parents, who'd made the long journey from Utah to see how their daughter fared. Sarah and Daniel walked through the property, inspecting everything with parental scrutiny, and Katherine waited nervously for their verdict. "You've built a good life here," Daniel said finally. "I'm proud of you both." "You chose well, Katie girl," Sarah added. "Preston's a good man, and he treats you right. That's all we could hope for." The validation meant more than Katherine expected, settling something anxious in her chest. She'd worried that leaving had hurt them, that choosing Preston over staying close to family had been selfish. But they were genuinely happy for her, and their approval felt like a gift. Preston asked her father to stay a few extra weeks, helping with a barn expansion that needed more hands. The 2 men worked together easily, and Katherine watched her father slowly fully accept Preston not just as his son-in-law, but as someone worthy of respect in his own right. They talked about ranching and horses, about the mountains Daniel loved and the plains Preston had chosen, and found common ground in their shared dedication to family. Winter passed into spring, and Katherine realized with a combination of joy and terror that she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable to someone with her training, even when she wanted to deny them a little longer. She told Preston on a March evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "A baby." His voice was wondering. "We're going to have a baby in late October if my calculations are right. Are you happy?" Instead of answering with words, Preston picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. "Happy, Katherine. I'm so far beyond happy there isn't a word for it. We're going to be parents. We're going to have a family." His joy erased her fears, and Katherine let herself fully embrace the reality. They were bringing new life into the world they'd built, expanding the future they were creating together. The pregnancy was easy at first, Katherine's strong constitution serving her well, and she continued her work with only minor adjustments. But as summer arrived and her belly swelled, Preston became protective in ways that sometimes amused and sometimes annoyed her. He didn't want her lifting heavy things or riding horses or doing anything that might risk the baby. Katherine argued that pregnancy wasn't an illness, that women had been working through it since the beginning of time, but she also appreciated his concern. "I know you're capable," Preston said after one such argument, "but humor me. You're carrying the most precious thing in the world, and I just want you both safe." "We're safe. I promise I'll be careful." She kept that promise, modifying her work but not stopping it entirely. Women in the area sought her help specifically because she understood their bodies in ways male doctors didn't. And Katherine wasn't going to abandon them just because she was experiencing the same condition herself. She attended births and treated female ailments and offered the kind of care that came from knowledge and empathy combined. Thomas and Margaret Thorne became unexpected friends, the older couple taking a mentoring interest in Preston and Katherine's success. Margaret especially took Katherine under her wing, offering advice about childbirth and child rearing and the specific challenges of raising a family in harsh country. They had grown children scattered across Texas, and Margaret missed having young people around to guide. "You remind me of myself at your age," Margaret told Katherine one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch of Katherine and Preston's house, shelling peas and watching Preston work with a horse in the corral. "Determined to do things your own way, smart enough to make it work." "You'll be a wonderful mother." "I hope so. Sometimes I worry I don't know enough." "Nobody knows enough before the first one. You just figure it out as you go and you pray a lot." Margaret smiled. "But you've got good instincts and a good partner. That's more than many people start with." Labor came on an October night when the first frost touched the grass. Katherine woke Preston in the dark, her voice calm despite the pain beginning to build. "It's time. The baby's coming." Preston had been prepared for this moment, had a plan for fetching the midwife from town, but the reality of Katherine in pain made him momentarily freeze. "Are you sure? Should I go for help?" "Not yet. First babies take a while. But maybe you could heat some water and gather the supplies we prepared." He moved with purpose then, grateful for tasks that let him feel useful. Katherine timed her contractions by the clock on their mantel, noting their increasing frequency and intensity with clinical detachment. This was just another birth, she told herself, except it was her own body doing the work, her own child making its way into the world. By dawn, the pains were strong enough that Katherine couldn't quite maintain her detached observation. Preston held her hand through contractions, his face showing every bit of pain she felt reflected back. She wanted to tell him it was all right, that this was natural and normal, but the words got lost somewhere between her brain and her mouth. The midwife, Alice Brennan, arrived mid-morning and assessed Katherine's progress with professional efficiency. "You're doing well," she assured them both. "Everything looks just as it should. Could be a few more hours yet, or could be soon. Babies come on their own schedule." It was afternoon when their son finally arrived, slipping into the world with an angry cry that was the most beautiful sound Katherine had ever heard. She was exhausted and sweaty and felt like she'd been broken and remade, but when Alice placed the baby in her arms, none of that mattered. He was perfect, tiny and red-faced and utterly perfect. Preston looked at his son with tears streaming down his face, unashamed of the emotion. "He's beautiful. Katherine, you're amazing. You did that." "We did that," she corrected, letting Preston touch the baby's small hand, watching as tiny fingers curled around his father's much larger one. They named him Patrick Daniel Tucker, honoring both Preston's brother who died young and Katherine's father. The baby was healthy and hungry, nursing strongly from the start, and Katherine felt herself falling into a love so fierce it was almost frightening. This small person was completely dependent on them, trusting them to keep him safe and help him grow. Preston adapted to fatherhood with surprising ease. getting up for middle-of-the-night feedings to change Patrick's diaper and bring him to Katherine to nurse, walking the floor with a fussy baby so Katherine could sleep. He talked to his son constantly, narrating his day's work and explaining about horses and cattle to an infant too young to understand, but seeming to appreciate the sound of his father's voice. "You're good at this," Katherine observed one evening, watching Preston rock their son to sleep. "I want to be. My father wasn't around much, always working, always distant. I want Patrick to know he's loved, to never doubt that he matters more than anything. He knows, and he's lucky to have you." The first year of Patrick's life was exhausting and wonderful, a blur of sleepless nights and small milestones. Katherine balanced motherhood with her healing work, bringing Patrick with her to see patients when she had to, relying on Margaret Thorne and other ranch wives to help with childcare when necessary. Preston continued building their horse operation, earning a reputation for training quality animals that were reliable and well-mannered. They were making it work, building a life that felt sustainable and good. The ranch wasn't huge, would never make them wealthy, but it provided enough. They had food on the table, clothes on their backs, and each other. That felt like more than enough. Patrick's first steps happened on a bright April morning when he was 10 months old. Preston had been leading him around the yard, letting the boy hold his fingers for balance, when suddenly Patrick let go and took 3 wobbly steps on his own before sitting down hard. The look of surprise on his son's face made Preston laugh out loud, and Katherine came running from the house to see what had happened. "He walked," Preston announced proudly. "Our boy just walked." They coaxed Patrick into doing it again and again, celebrating the milestone like it was the most remarkable achievement in human history. To them, it was. This was their son, their miracle, doing something that billions of humans had done before but which felt completely unique because it was Patrick doing it. The ranch continued to grow as the years passed, Preston and Katherine expanding carefully and sustainably. They hired seasonal help when they needed it, but mostly they ran the operation themselves, with Patrick learning to help as soon as he was big enough. By age 3, he was feeding chickens and collecting eggs. By 5, he was helping his father in the barn, learning to brush horses and muck stalls. Katherine's practice evolved as well, becoming more formalized. People came from farther away seeking her help, and she started teaching other women about healing and midwifery, passing on what she knew. Preston built her a separate clinic building on their property, a clean space dedicated to her work, and Katherine felt pride every time she walked through its door. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Katherine's mother, arrived when Patrick was 4. The birth was easier than the first, Katherine's body knowing what to do, and Preston handled it with less panic and more confidence. Sarah was quieter than Patrick had been, more observant with her father's gray eyes and her mother's serious demeanor. Patrick adored his baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly and help with her care. Katherine watched her children together and felt her heart expand with love she hadn't known she could contain. This family they'd built, this life they'd created from nothing, it was everything she'd never known she wanted. Years folded into each other, marked by seasons and growth and the steady accumulation of a life well lived. Patrick grew into a tall, serious boy who loved horses like his father and had his mother's gift for noticing what others missed. Sarah was quieter but no less determined, content to spend hours watching her mother work and asking questions that showed a sharp mind. Preston and Katherine grew into their partnership, the passion of early love maturing into something deeper and more complex. They knew each other's rhythms now, could communicate with a glance across a room, anticipated needs before they were spoken. They still fought sometimes, about money or how to handle the children or which direction to take the ranch, but they'd learned to argue productively and always came back to the fundamental respect that underlay everything. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked one night. They were sitting on their porch, watching the sun set over the plains they'd made their own. The children were asleep inside, the ranch quiet around them. Giving up on medical school and that other life you could have had. Katherine thought about it seriously, not dismissing the question with easy platitudes. "Sometimes I wonder what that path might have looked like, but regret? No. This life, this family, this work I do here, it's exactly what I was meant for. I heal people, I raise our children, I'm partnered with someone who sees me fully. How could I regret any of that? You saved my life that day on the mountain, changed everything. You saved mine right back, gave me a life I didn't know was possible." Preston reached for her hand, and Katherine laced her fingers through his, marveling as she always did at how perfectly they fit together. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing overhead, marking the sky with distant light. Their third child, another boy they named Daniel, arrived when Katherine was 30 and feeling like she maybe should be done having babies. But Daniel's arrival felt like completion, the final piece of the family they were meant to have. 3 children to raise in this Texas grassland, to teach about hard work and kindness and the importance of helping others. The years accumulated, bringing challenges and joys in unpredictable measure. Droughts tested their ranching skills and their finances. Illnesses swept through, claiming neighbors and friends, making Katherine grateful for her medical knowledge and frustrated by its limitations. Patrick grew into a young man who wanted to breed cattle, adding that enterprise to their ranch. Sarah developed a gift for training horses that surpassed even her father's, earning respect from hard-bitten cowboys twice her age. Preston's hair started showing silver at his temples, and Katherine found lines around her own eyes that hadn't been there before. They were aging together, growing into the life they'd built with the same determination they'd applied to building it in the first place. The love between them hadn't dimmed with time. If anything, it had strengthened, tempered by shared experience and mutual respect. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Katherine with a trip back to Park City, Utah, leaving the ranch in Patrick's capable hands. They made the journey that had taken them 3 weeks in 1878 in just over a week this time, the railroad having finally extended service that direction. Katherine's parents were older now, her father's hair white and her mother moving slower than she once had, but they were still vital and sharp. "You've done well," Sarah Greene told her daughter, studying Katherine's face carefully. "I see happiness when I look at you. That's all I ever wanted for you." "I found it, Mama. With Preston, with our children, with the life we built. I found everything I needed." Daniel Greene took Preston hunting in the mountains that had nearly killed him 2 decades before. They stood at the top of a ridge looking down at the valley below, and Daniel spoke with the careful consideration that characterized him. "You kept your promises to me. Took care of my daughter, built a good life with her, treated her like the remarkable person she is. A father can't ask for more than that." "She saved me," Preston said simply. "Not just my life, but everything that matters. I'm the lucky one. You both are. That's what makes it work." They returned to Texas renewed, ready to continue building the life that felt increasingly precious as time passed. Katherine's medical practice had become legendary in the region, pregnant women and sick children and desperate families seeking her help. She trained 2 other women in midwifery and basic medicine, ensuring her knowledge would outlast her, but she still saw patients daily. Preston's horse operation had expanded to the point where buyers came from as far as Kansas to purchase animals trained by Preston Tucker and his daughter. The Tucker Ranch might not be the biggest in the area, but it was known for quality and integrity, for keeping promises and delivering on commitments. Patrick married at 22, bringing home a smart young woman named Elizabeth who fit into the ranch family like she'd always been there. Their first grandchild, a girl named Katherine for her grandmother, arrived the following year, and holding that baby felt like coming full circle. Katherine looked at her granddaughter's perfect face and thought about the long chain of choices and chances that had led to this moment. Sarah showed no interest in marriage, too devoted to her horses and her independence, and Katherine supported that choice without reservation. Let her daughter find her own path, whatever that looked like. Daniel was still young, just 15, but already showing signs of being a talented healer himself, often accompanying Katherine on her rounds. "You think he'll be a doctor?" Preston asked, watching their youngest son carefully examine a sick horse. "Maybe. If he wants to, we'll find a way to make it happen. Times are changing. There are more options now." They were in their mid-40s now, not young anymore but not old either, in the prime of life with years stretching ahead. The ranch was profitable and sustainable, their children thriving, their grandchildren arriving at regular intervals. They had built something that would outlast them, had created legacy from nothing more than determination and love. On a summer evening much like 100 others before it, Katherine found Preston in the barn tending to a mare with a stone bruise. She leaned against the stall door, watching him work with the same patient skill she'd seen that first week in her family's cabin when he was healing and determined to help with chores despite his injuries. "You remember when we met?" she asked. Preston looked up, smiling. "Every detail. You appeared like an angel at the bottom of that cliff, determined to save my stubborn life whether I cooperated or not. You were a difficult patient. You were an incredible nurse, are an incredible everything." He came to where she stood, pulling her into his arms with the ease of long practice. "Katherine Tucker, I have loved you for 25 years, and I'll love you for 25 more if we're lucky enough to have them. We're already lucky. Look at everything we've built." "I know. But I'm greedy. I want every possible moment with you." Katherine kissed him, there in the barn that smelled of hay and horses and home. They'd traveled so far from that mountain pass in Utah, from the desperate moment when death had nearly won. But here they stood, alive and together, and surrounded by the life they'd created through sheer determination and love. The years continued their march, bringing the inevitable joys and sorrows of time. Katherine's father passed quietly in his sleep at 78, and she traveled to Utah to bury him in the mountains he'd loved. Her mother followed 2 years later, and Katherine mourned deeply while also feeling grateful they'd had such full lives, and that she'd been able to show them the life she'd built. Patrick and Elizabeth gave them 5 grandchildren total, a raucous crew that kept the ranch lively and loud. Sarah eventually married at 35, choosing a quiet rancher from New Mexico who understood her need for independence and partnership rather than possession. Daniel became a veterinarian, going to school in Denver and returning to practice in the Amarillo area, finally achieving the medical degree Katherine had once dreamed of for herself. Preston and Katherine grew old together, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and Texas sun but their spirits remaining strong. They still ran the ranch, though increasingly they relied on Patrick and their grandchildren for the physical labor. Katherine still saw patients, her knowledge and experience making her invaluable even as younger doctors set up practice in the growing city Amarillo had become. On their 40th anniversary, Their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at the ranch, the house and yard filled with family and friends and neighbors who'd become family over the decades. Preston stood to make a speech, his voice still strong despite the years. 40 years ago, I was a young fool who got himself ambushed and nearly killed. I fell off a cliff and figured that was the end of Preston Tucker. But then an angel appeared at the bottom of that cliff, a stubborn, brilliant, beautiful woman who decided I was worth saving. Katherine nursed me back to health, gave me a second chance at living, and then gave me the greatest gift possible by agreeing to build a life with me. Everything you see here, this ranch, this family, this legacy, it all started because one woman had the courage to save a stranger and the wisdom to see something worth loving in a busted-up cowboy. Katherine, you are the great love of my life, and I thank God every day that I fell off that particular cliff at that particular time. Katherine felt tears streaming down her face as Preston spoke, as their children and grandchildren applauded, as the weight of a life well lived settled around her like a blessing. She stood and went to her husband, taking his hand and addressing the gathered crowd. Preston likes to say I saved him, but the truth is we saved each other. I was a girl with dreams too big for the mountains I lived in, and he showed me there was room in the world for those dreams. We built this life together, through hard work and hard times and the absolute certainty that whatever came, we'd face it side by side. That's what marriage is, what love is, choosing each other every single day and building something that matters. I'm grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. They kissed then, in front of their assembled family, and the applause and cheers felt like affirmation of everything they'd created. This was legacy, this room full of love and laughter and connection. This was what had come from a chance meeting on a Utah mountainside, from a decision to help a stranger, from falling in love when it made no practical sense. Preston and Katherine lived to see their great-grandchildren born, to watch the ranch pass fully into Patrick's capable hands, to know that what they'd built would continue long after they were gone. They spent their final years in a smaller house on the property, built by their grandchildren who insisted they needed something easier to manage, and they filled those years with quiet contentment. Katherine passed first, at 72, her heart simply stopping one morning as she slept beside Preston. He woke to find her gone, and the grief was profound, but so was the gratitude for the 50 years they'd shared. He held her hand and thanked her one more time for saving his life all those years ago, for loving him, for building a family and a legacy with him. Preston followed her 8 months later, on a bright spring morning with the Texas sun warming the grassland. Daniel was with him at the end, holding his father's hand the way Preston had held Katherine's. "Tell her I'm coming," Preston whispered. "Tell her thank you for everything. She knows, Papa, she's waiting for you." Preston smiled and closed his eyes, and his children buried him beside Katherine on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together. Their headstone was simple, listing names and dates, but the real monument was all around them. The thriving ranch, the sprawling family, the legacy of love and determination that would echo through generations. Years later, their great-great-grandchildren would stand on that hill and hear the story of how their ancestors met, how Katherine saved Preston from certain death, and he thanked her by building a life together. They'd hear about the hard work and harder times, about the choices that shaped destiny, about love that lasted a lifetime and created ripples that would never stop spreading. The Tucker Ranch still stands, run by the 6th generation now, and in the barn there's a photograph preserved under glass. Preston and Katherine on their wedding day, young and hopeful and completely in love. Beneath it, a simple inscription captures everything that matters. She nursed him back to health after the accident. His thank you was unforgettable, and it was. 50 years of marriage, 3 children, dozens of grandchildren and beyond. A ranch that sustained multiple generations, countless lives saved by Katherine's healing gift, horses trained by Preston's patient hand. That was the thank you, lived out daily in choices made and promises kept. That was love made real, gratitude transformed into legacy. The Texas wind still blows across the grassland, carrying with it the whispers of those who built and dreamed and loved. And somewhere in that wind, if you listen carefully, you can still hear Preston Tucker thanking Katherine Greene for saving his life, and her laughing response that he'd saved hers right back, and the sound of a love story that will never quite end because its echoes live on in everyone who came after.